You can't be serious, High Commander. Ruthless slammed his three-fingered hand onto the crystalline table, causing ripples to dance across its surface. The humans? Those barely space-capable primitives who still think quantum entanglement is spooky action at a distance. The council chamber, usually a model of ZX-Lanthy dignity with its floating orbs of bioluminescent light and ancient wisdom crystals, erupted into a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and electromagnetic pulses, the various ways the gathered species expressed their amusement. I, first observer Kai Remem of the Diplomatic Corps, couldn't help but transmit a subtle wave of sigh and amusement through my translucent skin. After all, I'd spent the last 3 orbital cycles studying these primitives, and oh, if they only knew. With all due respect, High Commander, I pulsed, my skin shifting to a formal shade of deep blue. I believe you're operating on, shall we say, outdated intelligence. The chamber fell silent. Even the ancient wisdom crystals seemed to dim their perpetual glow, as if lending gravity to my words. Explain yourself, First Observer Supreme Counselor Athrax commanded, her crystalline exoskeleton catching the light as she leaned forward. All 12 of her sensor stalks focused on me with unnerving intensity. Gladly, I replied, my epidermis rippling with suppressed mirth. While we've been busy fighting our glorious war against the Nexus Collective, treating it like the greatest conflict in galactic history, humanity has been, well, watching. Watching, Ruthless scoffed, his cranial ridges flushing with dismissive purple. Like primitives studying their betters. Oh no, I felt my skin flash a brief pattern of warning red, more like predators studying prey. The chamber erupted again, this time in protests and denials. I waited, letting them exhaust their outrage. My outer membrane shifted to display a sequence of classified recordings I'd gathered. 3 cycles ago, a human vessel, one of their so-called science ships, witnessed our battle at the Harith Nebula. We thought nothing of it. After all, what could they understand of our advanced quantum weaponry and hyperdimensional tactics? I paused for dramatic effect, something I'd learned from studying human entertainment broadcasts. That same evening, a junior researcher on their orbital station, E Alpha, solved the equations for stable microsingularity generation, while drinking something called a Red Bull and complaining about their quantum mechanics homework. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Ruthless's cranial ridges had paled to a sickly beige. But surely, Supreme Counselor Athrax began, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain, they couldn't have. 6 days later, I continued, my skin now displaying a calm, professional green. They had a working prototype. They called it a weekend project. The wisdom crystals pulsed with anxiety, picking up on the collective mood of the chamber. And that, esteemed colleagues, is just one example. Would you like to hear about how they reversed engineered our quantum communications network after seeing it in action once? Or perhaps about the human child who figured out our photonic shield harmonics because it reminded her of, and I quote, a really cool math pattern. You paint an unsettling picture, First Observer Supreme Counselor Athrax said, her crystalline segments clicking nervously. But surely you have more concrete evidence than anecdotes about children solving our encryption protocols while consuming sugared stimulants. I felt my epidermis ripple with what humans would call a smirk. Computer, display observation file H1726, timestamp 3.7 cycles ago. The chamber's holographic matrix hummed to life, projecting a scene that made several council members' appendages retract in shock. It showed a human facility, specifically what they called a high school science fair. This, I gestured to a gangly human adolescent standing next to a contraption made of what appeared to be spare parts and something called duct tape, is Timothy Wong, age 16 Earth Standard Years. He built what he calls a mini quantum tunneling device for his science project. Ruthless snorted. Impossible. Our quantum tunneling technology took 3 centuries to perfect. Oh, it gets better, I pulsed, my skin flickering with barely contained amusement. He got a B because, and I quote his instructor, the presentation lacked adequate visual aids. The wisdom crystals pulsed an alarming shade of mauve. But that's not why I'm showing you this, I continued, my tone growing serious as my skin shifted to a deep indigo. Watch what happens when his friend Jimmy walks by with a prototype anti-gravity skateboard. The council watched in horror as the 2 devices interacted. creating a localized temporal distortion that turned Timothy's failed presentation into a roaring success, literally as it played out in multiple timelines simultaneously. They fixed the temporal paradox during lunch break, I added casually, over something called a peanut butter sandwich. Supreme Counselor Aethrax's sensor stalks drooped. By the first light, they're not even aware of how extraordinary this is, are they? That's what makes them so remarkable, I agreed. To them, reshaping the fundamental forces of the universe is fun, a hobby, something to do between what they call TikTok challenges. But the Nexus Collective High Commander Ruthless began. Has already noticed, I interrupted, my skin flashing warning patterns. 3 solar rotations ago, they sent a stealth probe to Earth. Would you like to see what happened? Without waiting for a response, I projected another recording. The chamber watched in stunned silence as a group of human teenagers, engaged in something called a stargazing club, detected the supposedly undetectable probe, hacked its systems because, in their words, its firewall was being super weird and that's like totally sus, and reprogrammed it to play something called Never Gonna Give You Up on all Nexus Collective frequencies. They called it a pro-gamer move, I explained to the bewildered council. Apparently it's a form of psychological warfare that their species perfected decades ago. First observer Supreme Counselor Aethrax's voice trembled slightly. You've made your point, but what makes you so certain they would ally with us? What do we have to offer a species that treats fundamental physics like a playground game? I felt my skin pulse with genuine warmth. That's the beautiful part, esteemed council. They want to be our friends. Not because they need us, but because, and this is a direct quote from their diplomatic message, space is too awesome to explore alone. A soft murmur rippled through the chamber. Besides, I added, unable to resist, they're particularly interested in what they call our totally rad bioluminescence. Apparently it would make their rave parties some form of tribal gathering, and I quote, absolutely lit. The fate of our civilization, Ruthless muttered, may rest on their desire to enhance their recreational activities. Oh no, I corrected, my skin patterns forming what humans would recognize as a grin. The fate of our civilization rests on the fact that humanity has already drafted 17 different plans to defeat the Nexus Collective, just because they were bored during something called a Monday morning meeting. The silence that followed was profound enough to make even the wisdom crystals hold their glow. Show us, Supreme Counselor, Aethrax commanded. I interfaced with the holographic matrix, my skin rippling with anticipation as I pulled up what the humans had labeled Operation Hold My Beer. Before I show you this, I cautioned, my epidermis shifting to a formal amber, I should mention that this particular plan was created by their interns, a category of humans who are apparently not yet considered full professionals and sustain themselves primarily on something called instant ramen. The holographic display sparked to life, showing a series of calculations and diagrams that made several council members' sensory organs retract in shock. They propose, I continued, my skin flickering with barely contained amusement, to convert Jupiter's great red spot into what they call a space-time blender. What Ruthless croaked, his cranial ridges practically white with disbelief. Their exact words were, yo, what if we use that big storm thing as a cosmic Vitamix? I projected the relevant audio clip. For context, a Vitamix is a food processing device. They want to use a planetary storm system as a cosmic kitchen appliance. Supreme Counselor Aethrax's crystalline structure vibrated with concern. Surely they can't. They already ran a successful test on a smaller storm system on Mars, I interrupted, displaying the footage. They called it Project Smoothie. The Nexus Collective lost 3 stealth fleets in the resulting space-time distortion. Humanity logged it as a happy accident and suggested adding extra protein next time. The wisdom crystals began emitting a high-pitched keen of distress. But that's just plan A, I continued cheerfully, my skin now pulsing with what humans would call trolling patterns. Would you like to hear plan B? They titled it, reverse card. Do we want to know? Someone whimpered from the back. They figured out how to reverse the polarity of the Nexus Collective's quantum consciousness network, I explained, displaying the surprisingly simple equations. A human teenager came up with it while trying to hack their school's Wi-Fi password. They intend to make the entire collective simultaneously experience something called a Rick roll. What's a Rick roll? Ruthless asked, clearly regretting the question as it left his speech organs. I played a brief clip of the ancient Earth mimetic weapon. By the first light Supreme Counselor Aethrax whispered, her sensor stalks curling in horror, and they believe this will defeat the collective. Oh no, I corrected, my skin flashing mischievous patterns. They believe this will be, and I quote, totally hilarious. The actual defeat comes from Plan C through Q, which they developed during something called a coffee break. I displayed more holograms, each more reality bending than the last. The council watched in growing amazement as casual sketches on napkins revealed strategies that violated at least 7 laws of physics, laws that humanity had apparently decided were more like suggestions. This one I highlighted, a particularly elegant solution, was created by their IT department after the collective tried to hack their Netflix entertainment servers. They planned to transform the entire collective fleet into what they call a giant space disco. But why, Ruthless managed to ask. Because, and again, I quote, it would be epic, I replied. They've already composed something called a sick beat for the occasion. They claim it will make the fleet, and I'm still trying to understand this phrase, drop the bass so hard, it'll create new quantum dimensions. The council chamber had descended into a sort of stunned silence that I'd come to recognize as the normal response to learning about humanity's unique approach to warfare. And these are just their backup plans, I added, enjoying the wave of horror that rippled through the chamber. Their primary strategy involves something they call Plan Yeet, which they assure me is, and I quote, gonna be lit, fam. First Observer Supreme Counselor Aethrax said slowly, her crystalline structure vibrating with what might have been fear or awe, you've convinced us. Draft the alliance proposal immediately. But first, what exactly does Yeet mean? My skin rippled with what humans would call an evil grin. Oh, you'll see. The Nexus Collective is about to find out in approximately. Now. As if on cue, every communication crystal in the chamber lit up simultaneously. The communication crystals pulsed with urgent messages from across the galaxy. My skin flickered rapidly between professional blue and amused orange as I processed the incoming data streams. It appears I announced to the stunned council that humanity has decided to. How did they put it? Ah yes, speed run this war real quick before dinner time. Before dinner time, Ruthless's cranial ridges were practically vibrating with confusion. Indeed. Apparently someone called Grammy is making mac and cheese tonight, and they quote, ain't gonna miss that for some wannabe space squids. The holographic display erupted with live feeds from across the battlefield. The Nexus Collective's mighty armada, 10,000 ships strong, each powered by quantum singularities, faced off against a single human vessel. That's it, Supreme Counselor Aethrax's sensor stalks twisted in confusion. Their great plan involves one ship. Oh no, I corrected, my skin rippling with anticipation. That's just Kevin. Kevin, the delivery guy. He's dropping off what humanity calls a special package. We watched as the lone vessel, apparently a modified food delivery ship, still bearing the logo of something called Jimmy John's Freaky Fast Delivery, approached the collective fleet. The council chamber fell silent as Kevin, wearing what appeared to be shorts and a baseball cap turned backwards, hailed the collective's flagship. Yo, Kevin's transmission echoed through the chamber. Got a delivery for, he checked his phone, the great consciousness of the Nexus Collective. The collective's response was a predictably threatening demand for surrender. Yeah, whatever, man, Kevin yawned. Look, I got like 5 more deliveries after this, so just sign here. He held up his phone's screen to the video feed. What happened next would be recorded in galactic history as the great yeeting, though historians would debate for centuries whether that term was properly translated. Kevin's ship released what appeared to be a small package, no bigger than a standard Earth pizza box. The collective sensors, detecting no weapons or energy signatures, ignored it. That was their first mistake. Oh right, Kevin added casually, already turning his ship around. The humans wanted me to tell you guys something. What was it? Oh yeah, get wrecked, N00BS. The package, it turned out, contained what humanity had dubbed a reverse Carta device that took the collective's own quantum singularity technology and, in the words of its teenage inventor, made it go brar. Every ship in the collective's fleet suddenly found its quantum singularity drives operating in reverse. 10,000 microscopic black holes simultaneously decided to, reverse card themselves, creating what one human physicist would later describe as the biggest no-you in scientific history. The effect was spectacular. Did they just make 10,000 ships yeet themselves into another dimension? Ruthless asked, his voice barely a whisper. Not exactly, I replied, checking the readings. They made them yeet themselves into all the dimensions simultaneously, while playing something called bass-boosted sandstorm on all frequencies. The council watched in stunned silence as the mighty Nexus collective armada folded itself through dimensions humans had invented on the spot, their ships trailing holographic memes that one human commander had added for the aesthetic. 4 minutes and 29 seconds, I noted, checking the timestamp. They technically missed their predicted time by 9 seconds. They predicted this Supreme Counselor Athrax managed to ask. Oh yes, they had a betting pool. I believe someone called XX_Noscope_XX just won 3 months of Reddit Premium, whatever that is. The chamber's wisdom crystals were pulsing in patterns that suggested they were seriously reconsidering their role as repositories of ancient knowledge. But where did they send the collective fleet? Someone finally asked. My skin rippled with what humans called ALOLL, according to these readings. Into something they called Brazil, though, they added a note saying Pix or it didn't happen. 5 hours, Supreme Counselor Athrax whispered, her crystalline structure still vibrating from the residual quantum distortions. They won a war that we've been fighting for centuries. In 5 hours. 4 hours and 57 minutes. Technically, I corrected, my skin displaying playful ripples. They spent the first 4 hours designing custom victory memes in something they call a sick montage video for YouTube. The council chamber's holographic matrix was still cycling through the aftermath reports. The Nexus Collective, once the greatest threat to galactic civilization, had been reduced to confused posts on something humans called Space Reddit, trying to figure out how to get back from Brazil. But the actual military operation, Ruthless asked, his cranial ridges now a fascinating shade of confused mauve. 3 minutes of actual combat, I confirmed. Though Kevin insists it would have been faster if he hadn't stopped to get an iced caramel macchiato at something called Starbucks on his way to the battlefield. The wisdom crystals had given up trying to process events and were now displaying what appeared to be the crystal equivalent of a blue screen of death. Just then, a new transmission lit up the chamber. It was from humanity's newly appointed Supreme Commander of doing epic space stuff, a title they had apparently created because it sounded cool. The holographic image showed a human teenager in what they called a gaming chair, feet up on their desk, eating something called Doritos. Supreme Commander Sarah Chen, age 17, greeted us while apparently also playing something called Elden Ring on another screen. Just checking in to make sure everything's Gucci with the whole space war situation. The entire Nexus collective fleet has been dimensionally displaced, Supreme Counselor Athrax reported formally. Their quantum consciousness network has been completely disrupted by something called a never-gonna-give-you-up temporal loop. Oh, Mao, classic, Sarah nodded, taking a sip from something labeled Mountain Dew. Yeah, that was my little sister's idea. She's like super into vintage memes. Your little sister. Yeah, she's 12. She was gonna make them watch something called Baby Shark on repeat, but we decided that would violate like 7 different space war crime conventions. The council collectively shuddered at the mention of this apparently forbidden weapon. So anyway, Sarah continued, brushing Dorito dust from her well, what's this t-shirt? We were thinking of celebrating by turning that empty space where the collective fleet used to be into a giant laser tag arena. You guys in? Before the council could respond, another human teenager popped into view, this one wearing what appeared to be a lab coat over a shirt that said, I'm not procrastinating, I'm letting my problems solve themselves. Yo, Sarah, the newcomer called out, we just figured out how to turn dark matter into something called a battle royale zone. Want to test it out? Sick, Sarah exclaimed. Hey, council peeps, rain check on the laser tag? This sounds way more poggers. The transmission cut off, leaving the council chamber in what had become its usual state of stunned silence. First observer. Supreme Counselor Athrax finally spoke, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had just watched several fundamental laws of physics get casually violated by teenagers fueled by energy drinks and memes. Draft a formal alliance treaty immediately. And perhaps include a glossary of human terms? I feel we're going to need it. Already done, I replied, my skin displaying smug satisfaction. Though you should know they've already ratified it on their end. They used something called a digital signature because, and I quote, actual signatures are so 2023. And the Nexus Collective, Ruthless asked, what becomes of them? I checked the latest updates, my skin flickering with amusement. According to these reports, they're actually enjoying Brazil. Apparently, they've discovered something called Carnival and have decided to, quote, vibe there for a while. And Humanity's Supreme Counselor Athrax asked, what are their plans now that they've casually ended the greatest conflict in galactic history? My skin displayed the pattern humans would recognize as a facepalm. They're currently debating whether to turn the Andromeda Galaxy into what they call a giant RGB gaming setup, because apparently space needs more rainbow lighting. The Wisdom Crystals, having finally rebooted, began displaying a new pattern one that looked suspiciously like the human expression _TSU_. And that, as humans would say, was that. The Great Galactic War, centuries in the making, ended not with a bang, well, technically several interdimensional bangs, but with a yeet. A delivery guy named Kevin and a dozen teenagers who treated fundamental forces of the universe like their personal playground. The day humanity entered the war, it took them 5 hours to achieve victory, though they insist it would have been faster if not for Grammy's mac and cheese schedule. And honestly, after everything I've seen, I believe them. As for me, I've started drinking this Red Bull stuff. You never know when you might need to casually rewrite the laws of physics before lunch. Just don't tell the Council about humanity's plans for what they call Space Halloween. Some things are better left as surprises. The end.